Hi there, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us today. Give us a hi or a hello in the chat box and let us know where you're joining us from today. I can already see that we've got Isbeth from Mexico. Welcome. You're the first one to today's Facebook Live session. We're going to give you a few minutes to come into the room. So if you're here already, make sure you're comfortable. Make sure you've got yourself a glass of water, maybe a notebook and a pen if you want to write down any ideas or any questions that you have during the session. And today's session is about how to help your teenage students manage their well-being. And we're very excited to be talking about this. This is a topic of great interest for a lot of teachers at the moment. And hi, Deborah from Vienna, Austria. Hi, Maria from Ecuador. Welcome. Give us a hello in the chat box. Let us know where you're joining us from today. Hi, Angelina from Macedonia. We've got Roxana from Argentina, Tayfun from Turkey. Amazing. We're reaching out across the globe already. This is wonderful to see. So yes, give us a message in the chat box. Let us know where you're joining us from. My name is Charlotte. I am joining us from Brighton on the south coast of England today, and it's lovely and sunny here. Feels like spring is finally here. And I'm very, very honoured to be joined by Pam Cotman and Louise Auckland today. Pam, do you want to tell us where you're joining us from?
Yep. Hi, everybody. It's lovely to see all these different names and places popping up. I'm joining you from Marlow in the UK, so just west of London. Yeah, shall I tell you a little bit about myself at this point, Charlotte?
Yeah, that would be great. No, go for it. That would be wonderful.
So yeah, I am a resilience coach and trainer and speaker. I work with schools and individuals and organisations to help them build resilience, help them understand what resilience is, shatter some myths around that, and then help them to build their resilience. But my background, and this is why it's lovely to be with you today, my background is a secondary school English teacher, a pastoral leader. I was head of year 7 and head of year 13, head of sixth form, assistant head for all things pastoral. So student well-being has always been front and centre in my teaching career, and I'm really chuffed that it is still playing a big part in the work that I do now. So it's really exciting to see so many names from so many places keen to think about how we can support our teenage students with well-being. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And Louise, tell us where you're joining us from and a little bit about your background.
Well, hello, everybody. I'm joining you from near Oxford in the UK, and likewise, I'm so excited to be touring the world, digitally anyway, and seeing all these people from everywhere, especially when I feel like I haven't gone anywhere outside of my converted garage for quite a long time. So it's great to see. So a little bit about me. I'm like Pam, I used to be a teacher, 15 years in secondary science education. So a particular interest in the brain and science and its link to well-being. So for the last few years, I've been working for Oxford University's Child and Adolescent Psychiatry Group. And there I run a research project around curriculums for early neurodevelopment. I'm also a mindfulness teacher for young people and for adults. So I have a particular interest in that area. And I'm also an author on the Oxford International Wellbeing Curriculum for OUP. So fingers in lots of pies, but all of them really around mental health and wellbeing for young people.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Pam. Thanks, Louise. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. And lots of you in the chat box letting us know where you're from. And yeah, as Louise said, it's so nice to be joined from people from so many different parts of the world. And if you are here, you're probably here because you want to know all about well-being. Well-being for me is a term that is used a lot, and sometimes it can be a little bit difficult to really understand what's meant by well-being. So I think it would be a really great idea to just kind of define what we mean when we're talking about well-being, and maybe in the context of learning. So Pam, what does well-being mean to you?
So obviously, being an English teacher and knowing what we were doing today, I went back to the dictionary to look at what it says about well-being. It's the Oxford Dictionary, obviously.
Of course.
Of course. And it's defined as the state of being comfortable, healthy, or happy. And I think when we think about that in the classroom, it's about a sort of a good state for learning. It's about everything that we can do to ensure that when we, if not walk into the classroom, that at least sit down and start learning, that we're in a place where we feel able to do that. And so for me, I mean, in the work that I do, well-being and resilience and self-care are kind of all intermingled, and they go to so many different places. But for me, I focus on 4 things. I focus on values, really ensuring that we're taking time to think about what matters to us, and that there is some alignment between what matters to us and what we're actually committing to doing. The second thing for me, I focus a lot on mindset. So I know that will connect with what Louise will talk about there, but really acknowledging that we have a choice in how we approach situations, and that can really help us with our learning to perhaps acknowledge some of the negativity and challenge it and think, okay, well, where do I choose to go with this now? I also look at confidence, which I think is huge in the classroom. How can we as teachers really foster confidence with our students? And then the last bit of this, which perhaps I think people commonly associate more often with well-being, is self-care, kind of hitting the basics of how we take care of ourselves every single day, not just in a lesson over here, and really just make time for the stuff that tops us up, which is going to be individual and different for everybody. But they're the things for me that I think about a lot when I'm thinking about well-being. So it goes beyond the comfortable, healthy, happy, although I think that's really important, and to something that is perhaps more holistic than we have often given it credit for.
Great, thanks, Pam. Louise, is there anything that you would add to that? I think Pam has covered a little ground there.
I mean, I entirely agree with everything Pam's just said there. I mean, I take a slightly different approach in that I tend to break down my thinking around well-being into the categories of physical well-being, mental well-being, emotional well-being, and social well-being. And that then, as teachers, helps us to sort of break down the strategies into those categories as well, and how they interrelate. But otherwise, yeah, I'm completely with Pam on her definitions there.
Thank you. And I can see, a few people have said in the chat box, it's an interesting topic. Elizabeth said a very interesting topic. We know that from a report that was conducted recently on the global impact of digital teaching, that 78% of teachers said that the shift to digital learning has raised concerns around learner well-being. So we are very aware that this is affecting a lot of teachers and a lot of students, the last 12 months in particular. So people joining us today, if you're teachers or if you're students, if you have any questions, please do pop them into the comments box. And, Pam and Louise are going to do their best to address your questions. I guess...
I wondered whether, just because you just mentioned that about that digital learning, whether in the chat people could just say whether or not they're either teaching or learning still digitally rather than face to face, or if you're in the classroom, just let us know, or if you're blended, so a mix of the two, just so we get an idea when we're thinking about strategies going forwards.
Yeah, great question. So let us know, what's your current situation? Are you in a face-to-face learning environment? Are you learning or teaching online? It would be great to see what people's current situations are. As those comments are coming into the chat box, I can see we've already had Radek say a hybrid. So hybrid has got a blend of both. Yulia Gamza has said virtually. So we'll wait and see what the feedback brings from that. I guess if we're thinking about the last 12 months in particular, and how that's maybe affected teachers, do we think that there is a difference in the type of well-being and support that we offer to our learners in that online environment compared to face-to-face? Or would you say that the tips and techniques you would use would be the same? Louise, do you want to get the ball rolling on that?
Sure. I mean, I think teachers have had a really steep learning curve in the last year or so with COVID in terms of upskilling themselves to be able to deliver online. But it comes with massive challenges when it comes to wellbeing, because as we started off this session by saying, really, wellbeing is a very personal thing. And sometimes as a teacher, we don't necessarily know where young people are, you know, how they're feeling at that point in time, what their sort of life satisfaction levels are like. And so I think it's quite difficult to do that when you are online, but there are ways and means in which it can happen, which we can go into more detail now, or we can think a little bit more about those challenges, whichever sort of more familiar. But I know from work that I've done earlier this year on OUP that actually quite a few of the teachers that are teaching OUP curricula are really struggling with that sort of online work and engagement of pupils, and really checking in with how they are at any particular times when they're online. I don't know, Pam, whether you wanted to add anything to that and how your experience.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. And listening to you and talking with teachers in schools, teachers who've been working from home, former colleagues, it's been an incredibly challenging time. And as you said, that learning curve has been massive. I think there's also, along with are we seeing students in the classroom? Are we doing it all online? Is whether or not you can see people. You know, so if you're working from and learning from home, are you actually able to see, or are you allowed to see your students? I saw someone mention something about body language, and that's, you know, we're pretty well accustomed to that as teachers, to be able to walk into a room and you can just check the mood of the classroom by looking at people's body language. If everyone in the class is tired or disengaged, you can kind of see it. Can you actually see it online? And I think your point, Louise, about just trying to create some ways in which you can get a sense of how people are feeling is really important, whether you're online or in the classroom, and making it part and parcel of your everyday experience. I think one of the challenges with wellbeing is it can end up being a totally separate bit of the curriculum, or it's only delivered by that teacher in that lesson, and it's not part and parcel of everybody's everyday teaching experience. And I know that's something that all teachers feel comfortable with, and perhaps today we can share some tools that will enable all teachers to feel a little bit more comfortable in doing that, so that we're just creating space, whatever people's experience has been over the past year. And just looking at the comments, I mean, there are some unbelievable experiences that people have had, but by creating space in the classroom, we're creating the psychological safety for them to show up however they're feeling. And then they're more likely to be in an okay position to learn. So whatever we're doing is really about ensuring that our students are okay, and then they can be okay to learn.
Great.
Absolutely. If you haven't got that sort of social and emotional learning sort of part of it sorted, and a young person or an adult is feeling happy about themselves, then, I mean, I always fall back on the brain science, because that's what I'm particularly interested in. And, you know, our two main areas of the brain that we think about in this respect is the front of our brain here, which is the bit we need for our learning, our planning and our organising and our critical thinking and so on. And then that bit right in the middle of our brain, that limbic system or emotional centre. Sometimes we talk about the amygdala, tiny little parts of the brain that really can hijack emotionally. But when we're in that state, the front of our brain is not working very well. And so really, we've got to make sure that our students are using this part of their brain, that they're comfortable, that they're feeling able to learn, and therefore able to perform and do the tasks that we're asking of them and the learning that is needed. So really, it is a crucial part of every teacher's work, really, not just an isolated teacher teaching wellbeing. And perhaps we can look at little snippets there, because as you say, Pam, not every teacher is necessarily comfortable with that idea. But the reality is we're all human. And so we need to make those human connections that will support that.
Great. And sort of on the subject of online, we've had a few questions come in ahead of today's session, which have been focused on a slightly different angle, asking questions about engagement in online learning, and I guess concerns around some of their students' lack of engagement. Do you feel like this is related to student wellbeing? And if so, what is the connection?
Louise, do you want to go for it?
Okay, I'll go for it. I mean, you know, definitely this has been a real issue, I think, for many teachers, is this engagement, particularly online, but also back in the classroom. I'm hearing from ex-colleagues are sort of saying really difficult to get students motivated to learn at the moment. And I think, you know, we're all feeling a bit like that, even the adults that aren't working in education. And so it's just remembering that and saying, well, where are we right now? And perhaps injecting a little bit of fun into things when we're doing our curriculum lessons, rather than focusing the whole time on curriculum, taking 5 minutes out to either do an emotional check-in, or to talk about something around wellbeing, or to hear from students, or to do something a little bit different that might promote that engagement. And I'm sure that OUP have got plenty of sort of workshops that they've run around engagement and motivation for students themselves. But really, if we're able to look after the well-being of young people, then the research shows that the motivation and engagement comes after that. So people that are generally happier in their everyday life are much more likely to engage with learning in the classroom.
I think back to what you were saying before, Louise, as well, about human connection. You know, I can see why some students might be rocking up to lessons and kind of going, in the grand scheme of things, what is the point of this? But if they only see us as the people who are there to deliver learning and not have that kind of pause to say, you know, how are we doing today? And to find an easily accessible way to do that. So we've talked before about, you know, that might be the question that you ask, or you might choose to use colour, you might choose to use emojis in a chat box if you're working online, so that people have a really quick and easy way to show you how they're feeling without having to give you chapter and verse as to exactly what it is that's going on with them. And I think the more often you do that, you know, again, so it's not something that's an isolated experience, it's something that is what they do every time they come into your lesson, it becomes more okay for them to show up on the days where actually they don't feel okay. They feel exhausted, they feel overwhelmed, they feel really stressed, they feel angry. All of those emotions are absolutely fine. And we can create space for everybody in the classroom to not only share that for themselves, but to normalize all of that stuff. I think part of the challenge with wellbeing is, because there's often not enough conversation about it in the classroom or in families or anywhere, it often leads to people thinking, I'm the only one who feels that way. I'm the only one who feels really angry, or I'm the only one who's terrified about what this exam might mean for the rest of my life. When actually, when you sit and have a conversation and everyone, you know, is asked, how do you feel about the exam that's coming up? You know, rather than the kind of fine, okay, whatever else, you get there, actually, I'm really nervous. I'm really worried about it. And you can have a conversation there about, okay, well, what's one step forward? What's one thing that you can do at this point to help? And that might be nothing to do with learning. It might be, let's pause so that, as you were saying, Louise, we can kind of reset our brain. We can take the kind of 60, 90 seconds, circles of breath to just, okay, let's just re-engage those bits of our brain. Let's join them back together so that we're then able to think logically. We're able to find a way forward, and we can show up and be better learners as a result.
Absolutely. And I see in the comments, actually, there's a comment there from Radek who talks about this whole frontal lobe taking longer to develop, which is that interesting thing around the teenage brain. And in fact, I think you might just get a link coming up soon, some work by UCL. So if you are interested in the brain and the teenage brain, there's a lovely, just a little video, a couple of minutes, if you're interested in finding out more about changes that take place in the teenage brain and how that influences their learning, their engagement, and all other stuff. So thank you very much for that comment, Radek. But I want to go back actually to something you said there, Pam, about that sort of just checking in. And I believe we've had a question before coming in terms of what, from the pre-questions, what can teachers do if this isn't your area? You know, teachers aren't trained in this area necessarily. So what can they do realistically to support young people? And I wondered whether it's worth just talking about little tips for the classroom, Pam, in terms of what can be done for quick check-ins. I mean, obviously, we've got this split here, this dichotomy. Some of you might be working in schools that take wellbeing very seriously, and they might be looking at it from a leadership, governance level, teaching explicit lessons around wellbeing, as well as targeted interventions for students that are really struggling. At the other end, you might be just you in your classroom thinking, I want to do something for my students now. And I wonder whether it's worth us focusing on that latter one, because that was what a lot of the pre-questions that came in sort of talked about. And for me, again, it's about that drip feeding it throughout your lesson. So taking a couple of minutes out, or a few minutes out, maybe a bit longer every now and again, to teach about those sort of areas. So how do we look after our well-being from a physical point of view? Sleep, nutrition, exercise. You know, how do we do it from a mental point of view? Can we recognize thought patterns that are not very helpful to us? Are we able to reframe those or think about them in a different way? Emotional, who's there to support us? Do we know what our emotions are? And do we know how those emotions show in the body? Because those are often the signals that tell us that we're not doing so well at the moment. And then those social networks, you know, who is it that they can go to for help? Can they come to a teacher? Maybe not you, maybe you're not the person for them, maybe it's someone else, but just having someone to support them through that. And for me, it's doing that check-in, a little bit of explicit teaching around different ideas there to the capability of the teacher. Ultimately, we're all human, and you know, we may not know about the sort of psychology of all these things or the well-being or the science behind it, but we can at least talk about it a little bit. And then encouraging students to monitor that. So maybe once a week in your lessons, if you're online, just say, right, let's just do something that went well this week for your well-being, something that didn't go so well, and something that you did that worked. Or has anyone got a question they want to ask the other students about what didn't work? Anyone got any tips for how I can get to sleep at night? Because I'm really struggling with all this rumination and catastrophizing about my exam coming up. So it's sort of encouraging that conversation. And that only needs to be a few minutes in the odd lesson. Well, I don't know, Pam, I'm sure you have loads to add on that, particularly with those emotional check-ins sort of side of things.
Yeah, I mean, I love what you were saying there about opening it up in the classroom, because it might be the only space in which our teenagers have the opportunity to do that. You know, if it's not something that they tend to do in families or in their social groups, yours might be the only place where they do that. And there's also something in what you were saying there that I think provides a really good modelling opportunity. I think, as you said, we're none of us are perfect. No. Contrary to what, I mean, maybe not teenagers, but contrary to what, you know, sometimes our students might think of us, we are not fully formed, fully developed. Aren't we all amazing adults? We have days when we're showing up and we're really feeling it too, particularly in the last year. And if we can model that for our students, again, it normalizes the opportunity for them to show up and go, oh, thank goodness, I'm shattered as well. I'm feeling the pressure as well. I'm struggling here. And, you know, and there's with boundaries, elements that we can share too. So I loved what you were saying there about asking in the classroom, you know, what are you doing to help you get to sleep? Or how are you revising? You know, what does a kind of a good revision day look like if you're someone who's in the midst of exams? I know not everybody is at the moment, but again, trying to offer something around there. I mean, we're getting into more kind of technical skills, but back to what you were saying about the emotional check-ins. One of the things that was recommended to me, actually, my son is in primary school, so he's 7, nearly 8. And he was having some big feelings that he was finding it really hard to manage, and we were finding it hard to manage too. And the person in charge of kind of learning needs at his school recommended something called the zones of regulation, which she sent me, and I've done a bit of Googling since, and I really recommend as an easy in for students of any age. I mean, we've got it stuck on the kitchen wall, and we use it as part of our kind of conversation about the kind of day we're having. But it's a really simple tool because it breaks down emotions into different words. So different words for how you might feel in the green state, which tends to be kind of happy. But interestingly, in the green state, it says ready to learn. So there's an acknowledgement that in different emotional states, we are better or otherwise able to learn. So if we are feeling a bit yellow and frustrated and wriggly, it's harder for us to sit down and learn. But once we've got the language for that, and as you said earlier, Louise, once we've got the physical connection of what does it feel like in my body when I'm stressed, the next step for me in that is, and what helps me to change that state? Is it, as you said, talking to somebody? Is it something physical? Is it movement? Do I need to just shake it all out? Do I need a kind of mini kitchen disco, which is my preferred choice at home? Do I need to breathe? What are the things that help me to change state? And I'd love to know in the comments for you, you know, what is it that helps your well-being? If you're feeling stressed, what helps you? If you are feeling completely overwhelmed, if you're exhausted, how do you show up in the classroom in a way that is not perfect, but good enough? because the more we practice this as the people standing in the front of the classroom or in the box that the teachers are looking at, the students are looking at, the more we practice that and can then share it, the better able we are to support our students, and the more tools we can offer them, and the more likely they are to start sharing that kind of stuff with us too.
Absolutely. And I think it's worth just mentioning at this moment that we have got a link in the chat box. It's a practical handout, and it does mention those zones of regulation that you were talking about just then, Pam. It would be, really great actually in the chat box to hear, what works for you guys. Do you have any sort of tips or techniques that you already use? And what are they? It'd be really great to use this moment for sharing best practice and hear what they are and hear how effective they are. And you mentioned exams a lot, and that is a question that's come up, that's always, I think, a grey cloud that sits over people as students, no matter what age you are. Even in my adulthood, when I've been enrolled on courses, I always feel this anxiety when I know I have an exam coming up, no matter how prepared or unprepared I think I am for it. And I imagine this is a question that you guys get asked a lot, how do you help students when they're feeling stressed and anxious about these big exams that are coming up?
I mean, the first thing I would say at this point is around being really careful with the language that we're using. We as teachers feel the pressure of, delivering results and students doing well. Does it make us feel any better about it when it's labelled the exams, the big exams, these are the most important things that are ever going to happen in our students' lives? Actually, it makes us feel worse, and our students will feel the same way. So I think there is an element of perspective that we can offer as teachers, and that's not to say we are holding our students back from being of their best. If I think back to my years as head of sixth form, I was supporting students towards their A levels. They absolutely determined a possible path for them, but it didn't mean it was the only path that was ever going to be available to them. So I think that focus on what is, so starting with, okay, this is the situation, let's focus on what you do know and what you can do and what you have done, and use that as a really solid foundation for moving forward. And moving forward is doing of your best, but that starts, going back to what Louise was saying, with kind of being of your best. When we're not going to be able to deliver on anything if we are spending 20 hours of a day studying. I remember working with students from year 7 onwards, so from the age of 11 onwards, who were really stressed and overwhelmed, and I would kind of sit down and look at their week or a revision schedule they might have put in place, and I'd look at it and say, where are you doing nothing? Where is the space in between, the space for the learning to sink in, the space for those neural connections to be made? As someone said there, having a mini music break or a stretch out, I think that's a really important part of our students understanding learning, is that we can't operate at this level all the time. We're just not designed to work that way. Us as teachers, our students, nobody is designed to operate in that way. So really allowing some time for what have we done before, celebrating those little wins we've had to this point, and then thinking, what is one thing that we can do moving forward? And that one thing, as we've said before, could be something that has nothing to do with learning and is actually about just getting ourselves in a better state to be able to figure out what we're going to do next with our subjects.
Absolutely. And there's a few things, Pam, that I want to pick up on there that you said. And the first is perspective. This is my favourite word at the moment, because it is always about perspective, and teachers can offer perspective there, but I'm going to put a little bit of a word of warning in there as well for teachers, that remember that with wellbeing, what works for one person won't necessarily work for others. So whereas someone might feel very satisfied with their day if they've run 15 kilometres and eaten incredibly healthy, done a yoga class and completed all of their work, for somebody else it might simply be getting out of bed and turning up to an exam, stepping through the door to the exam. And so really thinking, when you're thinking about perspective, but also about alternative strategies for supporting students, just asking them to suggest a few ways that help. So this is where the drip feed comes back in, because the more they practice things out, the more they work out what works for them and what doesn't work for them. You know, I'm very aware of that as a mindfulness teacher, and I would not normally use the word mindfulness if I'm just before exams working with students that haven't got a history of learning about mindfulness and what it means. Instead, I might say, well, let's just take a break. Let's do some breathing exercises. Or what would work for you? Would a walk work? Would a walk, getting out, meeting with friends, having a laugh, watching your favorite program on TikTok, whatever, or person on TikTok, whatever it might be. Timetabling that downtime, Pam, is incredibly important. And we know that young people, particularly those that are the perfectionist ends, of which I'm sure some of us teach, the perfectionists, who will have a perfect timetable with no downtime timetabled into it, if I can speak properly. So it's not timetabled in. So really being the adult there and saying, well, what are you going to do to relax? How are you going to look after your well-being? So again, just drip feeding it into that planning is great.
And there's been a few comments which came in on the subject of sort of well-being for teachers as well as students, and I know that this session is well-being for students, but you just mentioned something there, Louise, that just made me think, well, actually it's been acknowledged through a lot of chats and comments which have come in that teachers need to be mindful of their well-being as much as their students, and again there is further support and information about that in the practical handout that's being shared in the chat box. So anyone here today who wants to know more about that, please do download the handout and check it out. I can see we've just had a question come in from Mike Mesh, and he's asked, how can we help students to stay safe physically and mentally when studying virtually? So physically, I know there was a question that came in earlier as well about sort of how do you get students to take care of themselves physically, and how do you kind of monitor that when you're in this virtual environment? Pam, what would you say? What would your tips be?
I mean, the first thing that springs to mind is obviously if you're working virtually, there is only so much that we can do as teachers to positively affect what's happening, particularly if we can't actually see our students. If we can't see them, it is hard to, as you say, kind of monitor how they are doing physically. But again, opportunities during the lesson where, if we can see them or if we can't, again, what Louise was saying, that drip feed is just changing your physical state can have a massive impact on your ability to engage. So Louise, I know when we were talking before, and I'm trying to figure out if you're doing it now. Are you standing while you're?
I am standing, yes.
It makes a huge difference. I had a session with my coach last week and really thought about the fact that I have quite literally been sitting and working in a box for the last year. And that has a huge impact on our posture, which has an impact on our mindset. So, maybe saying to students, yes, we really encourage you to exercise, and yes, we encourage you to move in whichever way works for you, dance, walk, jog, workout, whatever. But actually encouraging students to change their physical state in a lesson could be a really easy invitation to just shift things around. So actually, we want you to stand up for this session, or lying down could be, heading them towards sleep, but just looking at different ways in which you encourage them to move. So it might even be to encourage them to do a stretch, or if you're encouraging some breath at the beginning, make it a whole body breath stretch. So actually they are opening their bodies up in every way to learning. The other piece was mentioned around mentally. I think we're kind of touching on that as we go through. I think those check-ins are the way to go about doing that. And just as we've said, to keep it regular, keep those conversations going, and to, I've seen a couple of comments about, how can we entertain our students? How can we be cheerful? I think, I don't know any teacher who feels that way all the time. I think we sometimes feel we should, but again, showing up in a way that is, as close to human as possible, of saying, how's everyone doing today? I'm actually feeling a bit blur. So I think I'm going to do this at the start of the lesson. Join in if that would be useful to you. Again, you're modelling what will work for students or what might work. You're adding to their toolkit, but you're giving yourself an opportunity to reset at the start of the lesson, which, we think about our student experience sometimes of zipping from one lesson to the next, or coming out of one chat room to the next. We're doing the same thing as teachers. We need to create some downtime for ourselves in this. So I've zipped around a couple of bits around saying safe physically and mentally. Louise, I don't know what you would want to add to that.
I mean, again, it comes back to that sort of check-in and drip feed, and encouraging the young people themselves to have the agency around what works for them. And so you could, for instance, okay, today's lesson, first 2 minutes, put in the chat, or anyone tell me something they've done this week to look after their physical well-being. Okay, and we're not trying to enter the sort of competition of, well, I've run a marathon, so we want to make those people that can just get out of bed feel comfortable with, I did a few stretches. I stood up during my OUP webinar, okay, my live chat, rather than sitting down. So celebrating the small things in some way. So that's one nice way to do it. Obviously, you can then have that broader reach to the rest of their lives. Again, teaching the importance of physical exercise. Well, if we're wanting to do the best we can in our exams, how do we nurture this thing up here in our heads, which is the organ that we use to do the best in our exams? Well, just like a plant, it needs looking after, and exercise is one of the things that does that, releasing the chemicals that can increase mood to help motivate and engage students and so on. So just asking them to try little bits and reflect on that. So a little bit of explicit teaching with a little bit of drip feed check-ins, how we're doing, supporting with the group. Anyone suggest how so-and-so can feel a little bit more energetic this week? What could they do? Maybe they can meet up with another and go for a walk. So again, then that social connection that beyond the classroom.
The other bit sorry, go on, Charlotte.
I was just going to say, I'm a massive advocate of physical interaction in learning. And I feel there is a bit of a crossover there. When I was teaching face-to-face, often, I'd get language tasks which involved physical interaction and kinesthetic activities. And there's no reason why you can't take that online as well. Ask your students to go and find something in their home which they would use in the morning, for example, and, make a vocabulary activity out of that, and tie in those language tasks that you're doing with your learners, and make it still make it this kinesthetic activity for them, and get them up and get them moving, especially if they've just, like you say, as I think it was you, Pam, who said students are going from one lesson to the next if they've just had sit down maths online for an hour, make your language lesson one where they've got to get up and go and do things.
And then you have the added complication of, for many students, their downtime is a game. It's on a computer, it's online, and really for those, it's just having that conversation around, how do you think that is for you at the end of the day? How much exercise and movement have you done? And whilst it's not sort of labeling necessarily their chosen downtime as a bad thing, it's saying, well, let's just balance it out with a little bit of exercise. Is there a way you could do that, or engage with a friend via a call or something as you walk, or as you walk to the shops or something, just to sort of just get that balance back into life? And I'm sure some teachers are sitting there thinking, this is well beyond my lesson, this isn't language teaching. But I think really, teachers underneath it want to do well for the students that they teach. And we don't do enough of this sort of more rounded looking after ourselves or education around that beyond it, particularly for some young people who are in very pressured home lives, where they're being pushed to exceed expectations on the learning side of things, and actually being able to turn around and say, well, actually, this is really important for my learning. I'm likely to be more productive if I've done some exercise. I'm likely to be more productive if I do this and get an early night and do all the other things that I need to do.
I think the other bit I wanted to pick up on, and that idea of helping students stay safe mentally, it's also develop strength mentally. When you were talking before about the little wins around well-being, I think it's the wins around anything. I think our educational culture and our working culture is often so focused on end results. So whether it's grades, whether it's waiting for a report, or performance management stuff, whatever it is, when actually we can create space in a classroom that allows for them to say at the end of each week, or the end, well, even, that often the end of each week or the end of a day, depending on how you have students, what are you proud of today? And like you said, it can be the fact that I got out of bed because actually I've been feeling rubbish. The fact that I just showed up here, even if I didn't engage much, is a massive win. Or it might be I've made some progress. I think celebrating the process of learning is as important. In fact, it's way more important to students' well-being than it is doing this at the end because you got whatever grade. And because that really fosters their confidence and their well-being, their mental well-being. over the course of their learning, rather than just waiting for some point at the end that they might not be that happy with the result, or they might not think other people are that happy with the result. So if we're celebrating the wins as we go through, that is far better, far psychologically safe for them to be showing up and to be learning anything at all.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to let everybody know, there is a link to our student wellbeing focus paper that's been shared in the chat box. So if, like Louise said, you're watching this as a teacher and you're thinking, my goodness, this is so much, and I don't have the capacity to take this on top of my other responsibilities as a teacher, please do give the focus paper a read. The focus papers are real sort of like bite-sized professional development papers, free to access for teachers, and full of practical tips, along with the practical handout from today's session. Thank you so much to everyone who's been involved in the chat box and has commented and asked questions. It's been really lovely to hear about what other people do and their experiences in connection to wellbeing. And I guess before we finish today's session, Pam and Louise, would you have kind of like one main sort of tip that you would want to share with all the teachers who've attended today, to help support them in their support of wellbeing with their learners?
So it'd be interesting to see whether we pick the same thing, Louise. I'm going to pick the one thing that I was told by, she was an educational psychologist. When I told her I was doing a big resilience project in our school, I told her all these grand ambitions I had, and she said, right, actually, if you could just get everyone to breathe, that would be huge. And I kind of laughed and went, oh, I could do a lot more than that. She was absolutely right. So my kind of gift and invitation to everybody would be to just take some time to breathe. I had a little block that used to sit on my teacher's desk, and it sits here now on my desk, and it says, breathe deeply and repeat. It enables us to pause and check in with ourselves and to be of our best in the classroom. And by inviting the students to do that too, we are enabling them to do the same thing. So my invitation to everyone, whether you're doing it with us right here, right now, or after this session before you go and do whatever else, is just take a moment to do a couple of cycles of breath before you consider doing anything else.
Oh, we so should have got to breathing much earlier, because I could do a whole hour on breathing, but I won't. I'm actually going to go for two things. So if you're on here and you end up going leadership route, or you have a whole school influence, then change the whole school, change the ethos, explicitly teach this stuff so teachers are not getting desperate at the last minute before exams and so on to teach their students. So change the whole school system. If you're a teacher and you want to know what you can do in your classroom, drip feed the conversations around wellbeing, incorporate it into your learning so that the young people that you're working with, the teenagers that you're working with, start realizing, oh, this is a place where I can explore. This is a safe place, and see the benefits from just drip feeding that over your course of your lessons. Oh, I could talk forever.
No, we could talk forever.
There's so much more to say.
Well, thank you both so much for coming along today to talk about this. And you're both so well versed in the subject, so I can't think of two better people to have along to talk about this today than yourselves. So thank you. And once again, if you are here and you want to learn more about how you can support wellbeing in your lessons, please do download the practical handout, and please also take a look at the focus paper on student wellbeing. And we look forward to seeing everyone who's attended today at our next Facebook Live event. It's always really great to see people from so many different parts of the world joining us. So thanks once again. Thank you, Louise. Thank you, Pam. And have a wonderful day, everyone.